I am an impossibility. I know I look intimidating. I know I look like Cruella de Vil if she competed in men's shot put. In my industry, I am known as the Lamborghini of cabaret because I am red, I am expensive, and on a good day, I can fit 4 Italians inside me. In my shows, I like to say that I am what happens if you tell your children they can be anything. They believe you and become everything. But the truth is, despite all that, I am an impossibility. I'm the child of Russian peasants and German refugees. My family survived the Holocaust, barely. One set of grandparents built railroads for Stalin during the war. The other fled Berlin and again barely survived the trip to Australia when Australia offered only 7,000 passports for Jews from the Second World War. And 2 of the 3 ships carrying Jewish refugees were torpedoed. My grandfather was on the 3rd. Once the war was over, they returned to Berlin to build communism. And we all know how that worked out. They survived the following escape from East Berlin and the second trip to Australia. They survived post-war Australia as immigrants. My mum, my dad, both with their own horror stories of growing up in families decimated, splintered. And then they survived having me. And I, in turn, had to survive school in Australia in the 80s, 90s, as a visibly queer child, which, as we know, a lot of kids like me do not. I spent almost as much time in the sick bay having my face stitched up as I did in class. I am a sexual assault survivor, which actually puts me in the majority. And to top the cliche, I have survived as an artist, a financially viable queer artist in this time, this pandemic, and under this federal government. I have been, in no specific order, mugged, gay bashed, Xanaxed, Lexapro, nortriptyline, counselled, Centrelinked, lectured and court-ordered. And all of this serves to remind me daily that I, flesh and blood as I stand, 6'2", 8 if you count the heels, Russian, German, Polish, Jew-ish, Australian, question mark, queer, painted, drag but not drag, comedy but not comedy, am an impossibility. But we are not here to talk about impossibilities. I'm here to talk to you about my father, my sweet, funny, brilliant father, who tried to teach me how to play chess and failed, who tried to teach me how to play cricket and failed, who taught me how to paint. But where he painted on an easel with watercolors and oils, I painted my face in grease paint, lipstick and blush. I actually still use one of his brushes. It's not a makeup brush, so it blends like shit. But it feels like him. I feel the warmth and surety of his hand when I hold it. And I remember my father's hands more than anything. It's funny the things we remember. Let's jump backwards. 1999. I'm sitting in my father's shitbox car on the Eastern Freeway, and little 14-year-old me, pale, thin, virginal, not by choice, believe me, is burning with the weight of what I have to say. I'm sure you can guess what it is. It's the worst. Sorry, I didn't know that reflex still worked. It's the worst thing I could possibly say. It's huge, bigger than me. I'm about to tell my father that I, Reuben Kaye, actress, model, and the only man to go to the sperm bank to make a withdrawal, am gay. I told my mother a week earlier, preparatory work. To give you an image of my mother, let me tell you these 2 facts. She escaped East Berlin, then they put the wall up. You do the math. She had an interesting reaction to me coming out. She took a long drag on her cigarette, slowly put it out on the nearest thing, probably my brother, fixed me with a beady eye and said, "Reuben, it is a mystery to me why you think I am interested. It is none of my business who you sleep with, just as it is none of your business who I sleep with." To which I said, "Mum, who are you sleeping with?" And she said, "None of your business." And she was right. Who I love is not as important as how I love. And who you sleep with is, to be frank, the least interesting thing about you. Now, I don't want you to think this was a shock or a surprise to anyone. I have always been comme ça. If you look at my sonogram, I'm using my own umbilical cord as a feather boa. Just thinking, less oxygen means a lower birth rate, and I want to be thin for my delivery. That's why I treated my mum's pelvic floor like a catwalk, which probably explains why she had it tiled. Just get that one in your own time. But the fact is, I didn't need to come out. I had a forward-thinking artistic mother that couldn't give a shit about who I was loved as long as I was loved. I didn't come out because I wanted to. I did because deep inside me, I had to. I was born in the 80s. Think about mainstream TV and cinema then. What gay role models did I have? What representation was there? Not today, but then. Every gay character was either a punchline, a victim, or a psychopath, or a Disney villain, which is a nice combo of all three, because femininity, queerness, or camp could only be depicted as either asexual, ridiculous, or sinister. And I was called faggot before I knew what one was. And I think that's true of every queer person, that we are defined before we can define ourselves, because our otherness, our queerness manifests itself autonomously outside of our control, and before we can even begin to grapple with it as a concept, before we know who we are told what we are, publicly, branded with it as a negative. And that's why coming out, which seems almost unnecessary now in this amazing world we live in, is such a big part of your own self-determination, because it is all very well to be seen by others. But to see yourself, plant a flag in it, claim it as your own, is a huge step, especially to family who up until then are the only thing that has defined you. Back to the car. I am still pale. I am still thin. But thanks to a tight corner and an oddly shaped gear stick, I'm no longer a virgin. In the 15 minutes since I said the words, "Dad, I'm gay," I know I've made a huge mistake. He hasn't said a word. Hasn't moved a muscle, may not even have taken an audible breath. What the fuck is going on? I told Dad last because he was the safe bet, the sure thing. Everyone else was a maybe, but Dad was there to cushion the blow. He was the one who'd always steered me away from toxic masculinity, away from confrontation, towards understanding, communication, compassion. He tried to teach me what his idea of a man was. But if I'm honest with you, I don't think he knew what that was. I don't think I know what that is now. I don't know what a woman is now. To me, we are all just a collection of soft, pink holes. Holes with stuff in them. Holes with stuff coming out of them or going in them. We're all just soft, jellyish holes waiting to be filled or emptied. Look at the person next to you right now. It doesn't matter if they're family, it makes it better, and think those exact thoughts. And then realize that I, Reuben Kaye, actress, model, and the man my high school voted most likely to be mistaken for a bucket, has cured gender. Thank you. And fathers matter. I know we'd like to say that they're like teeth in the suburbs or condoms in Berlin, optional. But they do. I know we'd like to say that we're moving towards a matriarchal society, like the bees. We're all going to be like the bees. And trust me, no one wants to be more like the bees than me. One queen getting fucked by hundreds of soldiers and then eating honey all day. Where do I sign up? But fathers matter, especially to queer men, because we lost a whole generation of them. Not blood fathers, cultural fathers. Men who we could look to model ourselves on, to learn how to live, love, create, connect, exist in a world that tells us we shouldn't. A whole generation of them gone in 20 years, thanks to another epidemic, and governments that willingly allowed my community to die in their thousands. The car reaches my mum's house, and Dad pulls the car over, parks, and slumps back in the seat and sighs, defeated. And I don't even hear what he says over the rushing of blood in my ears. I know it's not, "You're my son and I love you." I know it's not, "I just want you to be happy." I know it's not, "You're okay." It is none of the perfect things that perfect fathers say in perfect movies. he mumbles something about how I'll never be a father and how that means he failed. And we both sit there in shock in this new reality where neither of us are sure who betrayed whom. He leans over toward me for a hug, I think, but he just opens the passenger side door, waits for me to get out, doesn't look at me. I get out of the car and he just drives off. And I watch as his red tail lights disappear in the dark. And you know what? 2 days later, my dad was fine. Mysteriously more than fine. He was on board. He loved me so much, but there was always something unspoken. And the more he loved me, the more this seed niggled and recontextualized everything. And it was that moment. It was never addressed. And it affected our entire relationship. That in that moment, he couldn't see what his son needed and only saw it as a failure on his behalf. And in saying that, all I heard was that I was a failure. And that framed our entire relationship, like a Rothko of red bleeding into black that shifts the more you try to examine it. Every conversation, interaction was weighted with this leaden, unspoken moment. And don't get me wrong, my dad loved me. He was a brilliant father, incredibly supportive. But that moment, that singular moment is seared into my bones, as it is for thousands of queer children around the world. Not every one of them has my exact story, and a lot of them are far worse. But I can tell you the fear in my gut, the heat behind my eyes, the fear of rejection, the internalized guilt, shame, and rage are all the same. There is a universality when it comes to coming out. In queer circles, coming out stories are shared like war vets comparing scars, because for a lot of us, that's what it is. And trust me, the good ones are far and few between. 4 years ago, my father died. Cancer spread through him like ink in water. Shit luck. Proof that God has lousy aim. But something happened when he was diagnosed. We were given a deadline. And as any other procrastinators in the audience know, the best thing for a project is a deadline. Something told me he wasn't going to beat this. Blamed the hardline pessimism in my genetic code. So I faced up to it. And you know what? My dad, a man so conflict averse he was basically a golden retriever with separation anxiety, a man who still as an adult suffered nightmares of the Holocaust his parents barely escaped, who hated confrontation of any kind, did the same thing. Any parent here knows that there's no handbook. Parents, no matter what they'd like us to think, are just making it up as they go along and trying to cope. And it's a hard reality that in the job as parent, there's a real rough peer review. There is a moment when a child looks at their parent and no longer sees them as just dad or mum, but as a human being. And a parent sees their child as an adult, the adult they raised. And that is where shit gets real. And I asked him why. I asked him why he reacted like that. Why couldn't he just say, I love you, you're okay. I love you, you're safe. We can work everything else out later, but right now, I've got you. And for the first time since that 14-year-old boy stepped out of that car, we actually talked about it. And in his answer, I realized, what choice did he have with the tools he was given? A man who saw the evidence of genocide in his own decimated family tree. A man for whom family was more than everything. It was meaning, pleasure, life, and duty. He apologized, but I didn't forgive him exactly, because forgiveness doesn't sit right with me as a concept, because I didn't feel he needed to apologize. Perhaps because I finally understood him and I loved him. I still do. I had one of the best dads a man could have. And even though we wasted so much time in unspoken battle, the 3 years I got with my dad before he died were worth more than a lifetime. They were a lifetime. Coming out stories are legion in the world. There are millions of them. And perhaps finding them so commonplace dulls their importance, but trust me, Every person who has come out remembers that day, that night, every minute detail, and they remember their parents' and friends' reactions. It is burned into us like a brand, and it stays with us forever. Because when we say to our family, I'm gay, I'm bi, I'm trans, I'm queer, what we are really asking for is, am I okay? Because the world is telling me I'm not. And the world is better now, but it's still not great. America is constantly trying to tear down protections against discrimination while scrabbling to establish anti-LGBTQIA legislation. The Chinese government has just banned effeminate men from TV and cinema. Conversion therapy and the divide between church and state exist across the globe and are narrowing. Fascism, white supremacy is on the rise, and I, as a gay man, am still restricted from giving blood as easily as my heterosexual counterparts because my blood is risky and tainted. There are still acid attacks in London and gay bashings all over the world. And 8 men were just jailed for throwing acid at people coming out of a gay bar in Dalston. So yes, the world is better, but it's still unsafe for queer people. And sometimes it seems impossible that we'll ever get to a stage where who we love in our own private life is no longer a matter of public concern. Sometimes you may think, oh, it's impossible for my son to be gay or my daughter to be trans. And sometimes it seems impossible that the thing that terrifies you, that scares you, will be accepted by those you love, celebrated by the world, and become your biggest strength. And sometimes it seems impossible that your parent feels they reacted the wrong way and doesn't have the tools to talk about it but wants to. Impossibilities are everywhere in this world. You're looking at one. But amongst the impossibility of this story, of my existence, of this world, is the very real possibility that your child is going through exactly the same thing, or that your parent wishes they'd reacted differently and doesn't know how to talk about it. I know my story may seem impossible, but it could be any of yours. There is the possibility that I could be one of your sons. And perhaps the gift that my dad and I can give you is to know that a moment can be more than a moment. The moment your child comes out will be remembered for the rest of their life, good or bad. So make it a good one. Thank you.